All right. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon and good morning to our friends on the West Coast. I'm Connor Smith, CEO of the Boss Group, and I'm here with my colleague, Jackie Schaefer, Vice President and General Manager of Sela. Jackie and I are back once again. It's kind of a spring rite of passage here to provide you an overview of what's new and newsworthy in the 2018 in-house Creative Industry Report. As in previous years, we're going to use about 30 to 45 minutes of this hour to tell you about the report and the content provided that is in addition to the charts and data that we all love, review some of the data points that are always of interest, and to tell you what's new this year, and also share some data points that made us go, And if that song gets stuck in your head, you can thank Jackie and I for the rest of today. Sorry about that. And we'll remind you of what Boss Group and Sela do and how we can help your teams before we take some questions. Year over year, we've been really fortunate to receive a lot of questions, which is such a great validation of this webinar as people tend to stick around to the end and ask a bunch of questions. Feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation or at the end via the questions pane in the GoToMeeting control panel. So with those housekeeping items out of the way, let's jump right in. Jackie, why don't you get us started?
Thanks, Connor. I think we say it every year, but if you would have told me back in 2010 when we first launched this, that we'd be publishing a report every single year, it would grow to 64 pages, that we would be asking more than 125 questions, I'm not sure I would have believed it, but it's incredibly exciting. 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to preview parts of this presentation with our Beyond the Creative attendees in San Francisco. And during that discussion, I apologized to folks because I know that this survey has gotten really long. You guys spend 20 to 30 minutes responding to it, and for that, we are incredibly grateful and thankful. But I was really pleasantly surprised because the attendees, they looked at me and they're like, but it's worth it, Jackie. It's really important that everyone do this. And they kind of chided the folks in the room who hadn't participated this year. So that was also a wonderful sense of validation. But that said, next year we are going to take an aggressive approach to retiring or at least sending some questions on sabbatical. I think it's really important that there are some questions we do ask year over year. But there's other ones I think we can ask every other year or less frequently and still have a really valuable takeaway in the report. In fact, I think it'll allow us to bring some new takeaways. So reducing questions will not only decrease the amount of time it takes each of you to do the survey, but what I'm most excited about is there's new questions we want to introduce. There's new questions you ask us to introduce. Recently, we've been doing some pulse surveys, which are these little surveys we do that typically have 50 to 100 respondents. And we've been doing them on topics like agile and mission statements and account management practices. Those are the types of questions I'd love to move into this survey, and it can only do that if we reduce some of our questions. So that's my promise. In year 9, you're going to see a lot of brand new questions, and some folks are going on sabbatical. As with previous years, and I know our loyal readers will know this, we survey on a broad range of topics. The report is organized into these sections to help you quickly navigate to the data points you're looking for. The PDF has bookmarks, so please use those. That'll help you. In addition, you can just do a find to look for that chargeback word or whatever word, your keyword you're looking for. We're really pleased this year. We had 435 respondents, which is a nice substantial growth over last year. Last year, we had dipped down below 400, which was a little bit disappointing. However, the report was still amazing. But again, I'm really happy to see we've had more folks participate again this year. You can see here, tons of different industries are represented. Revenue bands are represented. Different funding models represented. Different team sizes are represented. And this broad audience allows us to collectively understand where industry standards lie, as well as when or if differences such as industry, team size, funding model, revenue matter. The Boss Group and Sela, we're narrowly focused on serving the needs of in-house creative leaders and their teams. So this survey, we make sure that folks who respond are in-house and they are in leadership roles, because that's how we get the most valuable results that can help you support your business.
One of my favorite parts of the report, and I think Jackie would agree, is just an awesome section, are the 4 articles authored by creative industry leaders called Perspectives from the Field. And I want to take a few moments to highlight them as the content is, again, outstanding. You'll find these articles throughout the report on the full bleed pages and positioned next to the section divider pages, and they're also bookmarked in the PDF as well. Our first article comes from Wayne Barringer, Head of Creative Services at Boeing. Sela was fortunate enough to have Wayne participate in our recent Beyond the Creative event, where Wayne brought this article to life in a presentation to the attendees. Wayne shared the 3 key superpowers that in-house creative teams possess, as well as the 4 types of kryptonite that can hold teams back. Wayne led his team through a reinvention of itself and provides a few tips on how to be successful in-house. The consulting team at Sela has been supporting more and more in-house agencies that are considering expanding globally. Our consulting practice lead, Cindy Ponce, has planned and launched 4 studios in Europe and consulted for numerous organizations looking to do similar expansion. In this article, Cindy shares her expertise by outlining the considerations in-house leaders must assess and plan for ahead of launching global creative teams. Robin Colangelo, the great global director of creative services for White & Case, is the author of our 3rd article. Robin draws parallels between the importance of your corporate brand and the brand of the in-house creative team, which we regularly deprioritize so we can fight the next fire. I'm sure more than one or two heads are nodding in agreement with that. Robin writes about the importance of a clear value proposition and the vision and professional development program that you have to have your team's engagement and performance, all which impact your team's brand. So focusing on those really important things which have a high degree of impact on your team's brand. Very well done. Our final article comes from our friend Andy Epstein, the Director of Studio Operations at Sela Solutions. Content is key when it comes to scaling marketing and communications, and organizations are clamoring to implement teams, methods, and technologies to take advantage of content assets. In this piece, Andy writes about the role of the in-house agency when it comes to content management systems and automations. To complement the perspectives from the field, we've included 2 new pieces of content this year featuring highlights from our 2017 Creative Execs Roundtable series. The first page addresses minimizing turnover and, more importantly, engaging your high performers so those folks don't leave you. A certain amount of turnover is actually healthy. However, you don't want to lose your A player. Turnover amongst A players is rarely healthy. The second page addresses broadening your team's scope of work or services. Many of the takeaways centered around collaborating with your key stakeholders and internal clients to identify new ways of supporting the business. As a reminder, across the bottom of the report, we list blog posts related to the topics on that page. Resources with green links are new to the report and were published within the past year, whereas blue links have appeared in the report before and are still relevant.
This next set of slides features benchmarking questions you've seen for many years. However, what we're going to do here is show you this year's data, but also show you some year-over-year data alongside of it, or maybe some data cuts by industry, by team size, et cetera, that don't appear in the report. So if you like numbers, it's going to be really awesome. If you don't like numbers, it's going to be a long hour. Each year we ask respondents where their in-house agency reports. So respondents are able to select from these 15 choices. You see marketing, sales, communications, et cetera. There's also another option they can do a write-in. We then sort the 15 options into one of 2 groupings, strategic and non-strategic divisions. So this isn't to devalue the groups who we label as non-strategic division reporting. It's more to acknowledge that there are different challenges for groups that are housed inside like a shared services division, for example, versus a marketing and communications division. Typically, the more closely aligned you are with marketing and communications, the more you're viewed as part of a value stream versus potentially like a third-party partner. That said, there are a lot of advantages to being aligned within a shared services department or division. So, for example, you're typically asked to, not just asked, but tasked to grow in order to support a broader base of clients outside the marketing department. In the report, we present the responses to this question at this granular level. You'll see how many people said advertising, how many said brand, et cetera. But on this slide here, here's our 2017 results, and I'm going to show you 18 in a minute. We rolled it up into strategic versus non-strategic. So you can see in 2017, about 3/4 of groups said they report into a strategic division. We had a big increase this past year. We saw a 9-point jump. And we've actually worked with a few companies in a consulting engagements who have made this switch. So we've definitely seen it. However, I'm kind of holding back until 2019 results are in to see if this was is a true shift or more of like an anomaly based on the folks who responded to our survey this year. Team size is a question we are going to ask you every year because it's really important. And while between 2017 and 2018 there was not a lot of change, in past years we have seen significant shifts in the size of teams. This year I chose to include it because what I wanted to show you guys was how team size compares or correlates rather with your company's revenue. So before we look at that though, one thing I need to say is we have worked with companies who, for example, 3 companies in the same industry in the Fortune 500, but each had very different creative team sizes. So while they all had high revenues, the difference was really about how their company chose to invest in marketing communications, not about their corporate revenue. So there's that. But there is a clear correlation between a company's revenue and the size of their in-house creative team. You can see on the left that companies with less than $5 billion of annual revenue are more likely. 60% of them are small teams, right? And only 10% are large and mega. Large begins at 30 people on a team, 50 is where mega teams begin. And then if you look over on the right-hand side where it's greater than $5 billion, so basically Fortune 500 status, it's almost split up 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 across the 3 major team sizes. Another one we'll continue to report on annually is the funding models. And chargeback is the minority approach to how a department is funded. However, for those groups that are chargebacks, it's such a driving force in how you operate. It's really important that we survey this space and provide updated information regularly. There's pros and cons with both models. I think most people are aware of those. There's certainly no silver bullet that being a chargeback helps with. However, if you want to go deeper into learning more about the pros and cons of the different models, if you go onto Sela's blog and just type in funding models in the search box, you're going to find a lot of results. There's been very little difference over the past 2 years in the percentage of teams that are chargeback. The dark green is yes, we are a chargeback department. The light green are the folks that are yes, sometimes we are. So what that typically means is they either only charge back certain types of clients or for certain types of work. Here's the interesting thing that we haven't shown before, but funding models by team size. I know we've spoken to it a lot, but here it is for you, small, mid, large, and mega. The small teams of 10 or less, and the mid-sized teams, it's kind of funny how mid-sized teams are actually a little bit more likely here to not be a chargeback than small. I think that's just an anomaly, but 3/4 of small and mid-sized teams are centrally funded, are not chargebacks. As soon as you get to large, you see it growing, right? We have about 43% of large teams are chargebacks, and then it grows substantially with our mega teams, right? So we have 2/3 of mega teams are chargeback departments at some level. The next question, if you are a chargeback team, you always want to talk about, well, what's your chargeback rate? People want to compare with other folks. Once again, the average response, or the most common response, to be more accurate, is between $81 and $100 an hour. However, what I want to draw your attention to is that 51% of respondents actually said our chargeback rate is less than $80 an hour, and 22% is we're higher than $100 an hour. So while 80 to 100 is the majority response, it's certainly not the majority of people. What can drive these different changes in people's chargeback rates? Because it's a large swing, right? It's a big variability here. The discrepancy can be tracked back to 3 major factors. The first one is the geographic location of the company. Simply, it's just more expensive to operate in cities like New York and San Francisco than it is in Baltimore and Philadelphia. Also, the company's compensation philosophy, there we go. Some companies have incredibly generous salaries and benefits programs. Some companies don't cap people. You can keep getting raises every single year and be paid outside the market rate for a position, which is very good for you and not very good for the company's or the department's chargeback rate. And the last factor is the recovery goal. So by recovery goal what I mean is how much of your department's budget do you need to recover? So groups, and here, take a look at how we asked this question. folks in the blue here, that's what pieces of their budget they have to recover. So some 3% just have to recover the salaries of their people. 4% have to recover the people's salaries plus their benefits and taxes. And you can see so on, it increases as you go down the blue ones. The majority of folks in the blue, the 14% response there is all costs. So the personnel costs, the direct operating expenses, which are things like training costs, travel costs, IT costs, and then also the overhead they have to recover. Now the folks in the green, that's the box. I have angst for those people because they don't know why they are recovering what they are. So 45% think or are under the impression they don't have a specific recovery goal. They're just charging the charge, and I would ask your finance department if that's true. 5% of folks are just told to get a number. Hey, recover $5 million, and then you're given like a percentage of your operating cost or your total department budget to recover. So maybe some folks are told one thing, but they don't really understand what's behind it. So you really want to move. If you're in that green box, in those green bars, my goal for you is to become one of the people who know more about their budget and their recovery goals and get into the blue bars next year. When you know that, you can impact how your department operates and how you can manage your cost. Going back to the chargeback rates, we added a second table here below the original one we looked at. For those teams that are required to recover more than their personnel cost, you can see how these numbers have changed. 40% now fall in that middle bucket of $81 to $100 an hour. Just a little bit over a quarter of folks fall to the left of it, and now a third of folks fall to the right. So what I'm getting at is this is not apples to apples, right? When you want to talk about what people's chargeback rates are, make sure you find out more than their rate. What's behind their rate?
Number of projects per year. The question that Jackie loves to hate. How many projects did your team work on last year? So, Jackie, we've been having this fun conversation for a couple years now, and I think this year became really abundantly clear perhaps why Jackie has a love-hate relationship with this question. Across small, mid-size, and large teams, we saw expected results. However, the mega team results definitely threw us for a little bit of a loop. It is, of course, to us, it makes complete sense that mega teams would have the highest number of projects. That's obvious, and that the number is as high as it is. However, this doesn't match what we've seen in previous years. To show you what I mean, let's go back to 2015. We had two majority responses that were pretty far apart. Moving on to 2016, we saw one majority response with 27% of teams completing between 4,000 and 5,000 projects, and then there were strong runner-ups with between 1,000 and 2,000 and more than 8,000 projects. Then in 2017, we saw the responses even out. The majority response was just 20% of respondents, so no clear answer to how many projects mega teams do each year. Now keep in mind that mega teams can be as air quotes small as 50, which is still a pretty large team, but they could also be as large as several hundred, so there's somewhat of a variance there. Now let's look again at 2018. 30% of respondents indicated they do 8,000 projects or more a year. So you can see why this one has us scratching our heads. The other thing that can throw this question off is what do you define or how do you define a project? There's some inconsistency as to what is called a campaign versus a project. In this question, we're seeking to understand the number of deliverables a team creates, and I think, Jackie, this is maybe what gets your goat, so to speak, every year, is this exact kind of issue. Exactly.
Again, it's not an apples to apples. You need to ask more behind the question.
So two kind of dangerous questions to ask a colleague. What's your chargeback rate and what's your number of projects without having the time to dig deeper?
Great.
There have been so many changes within the in-house creative industry in the past 10 years. Such an exciting time to be, a part of this industry. One of the most exciting has been the introduction and wide use of project management systems, and specifically the move away from homegrown solutions to sophisticated off-the-shelf systems. When we first asked this question in 2014, at which point a little over half the respondents were using project management systems, some homegrown, some off-the-shelf. Fast forward 4 years to this year, the number has climbed to almost 8 out of 10 teams utilizing project management systems. For that 22% who hasn't joined the party, we're really wondering what's stopping you. There's just so much to be gained from tracking your project and effort levels. While Sela remains agnostic when it comes to the tools, as everyone has different needs, it's pretty undeniable that Workfront has become the market leader within the in-house creative industry. This is the third year running that Workfront has occupied the top spot. This is up from 2 years ago when 15% of respondents indicated they use Workfront, which was enough to earn them the #1 spot then. And then back in 2015, Workfront wasn't even in the top 5. And Jackie, real quick, just anecdotally, why do you think some of that, the 20% haven't kind of joined this party yet when it comes to project management technology?
It's a good question. I wonder if maybe they think it's cost, and there certainly are very low cost options out there. I would never recommend to go try and do it completely cheap by using Excel, as you might already have that. That's going to be too much effort. However, there are inexpensive programs that we're happy to point out to folks that they can get in for, if it's a small team, you can be paying less than $200 a month to be able to track your projects and your time. And an interesting data point that we didn't share here is that while almost 80% of teams use a project management system, it's between 60 and 65% track their time. So it's not always a one-to-one correlation. So maybe some folks are hesitant to get into a system because they think they have to track time as well. You don't. You should, but you don't.
So we can just put aside cost should not be one of the reasons that you're not doing this, and just ask yourself intentionally, why is it that we're not?
Yeah.
Get on board.
I don't like that metric on how many projects that you have, right?
I thought we just put that to bed.
I'm going back to it. But the truth is there are still some teams who can't tell me the answer to that because they're not tracking their projects at all. And that's an important thing to know, who you're doing your work for, how much you're doing of it, what kind of work you're doing. Yeah. 22%, get on board.
It's a loaded metric with a lot behind it.
For sure. So now onto the questions that we added for the first time here in the 2018 report. This first one, it's almost become trite in the in-house industry to talk about moving from order taker to the strategic partner. It's a goal that many in-house creative leaders and their teams have. So this year we wanted to try and report on where teams fell on that spectrum. Hopefully over time, what we'll be able to do is report on the trend of how teams are moving quantitatively, because across the past few years, I think it's been qualitatively spoken to across the industry, but I think it's important to put some real numbers around it. So when we designed this question, our first challenge, and I just want to admit this to everyone, was defining the stages within the spectrum. Our consulting team batted this one around more than a few times, and it was difficult to somewhat succinctly label and define these milestones along the journey from order taker to strategic partner, but I think we ended up in a pretty good place. Maybe not surprisingly, the most common response was right there in the middle. 35% of teams identify themselves as a developing strategic partner. So what that means, if it's too small on your screen, that they believe they have a healthy mix of all 3 tiers of work. They've got complex creative work, they've got the rules-bound templatized work of tier 3 and that in-the-middle iterative work, and they have a growing base of tier 1 work. So they're starting to provide additional value at that higher end of the creative spectrum. Next out are the ones right down to the left and right of center, and the bell curve continues for production studio and I want to make sure I get this right, read it closely, organizational strategic partner. It's really important for everyone to agree, right, that becoming an organizational strategic partner is not for every team. It's not what every company wants out of its in-house agency. So because that's on the far right doesn't mean it should necessarily be your goal. You have to figure out what your company needs of its in-house agency to determine where your goal could be. I will also say, and I think you guys will agree, that some companies don't know what their in-house agency could possibly do for them. And you can help inform them as where an appropriate place that your team can provide the best value and quality for them could be. So this question here on the left, it asked about the breakdown of in-house agencies' projects. What percentage of projects fall into those 3 categories of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3? And we actually asked this question here on the left last year. It's as expected, most of the work falls in tier 3. It's actually exactly even with tier 2, which is a little bit surprising. And then tier 1 is the lowest number of projects. What we wanted to go is one step further this year, and so for the first time we asked a follow-up question on how much time you were spending on these different tiers. Our hypothesis is that we would find that while tier 1 projects are the lowest number of projects, that they would actually take up proportionately more time due to the complexity that typically, comes with tier 1 projects. However, that didn't really happen. It was a little bit more time, but it wasn't as dramatic as we would have expected. So it can either be attributed to maybe one of two things, maybe more, but one of two is what I thought about. Maybe our questions weren't written well enough that people understood the difference of what we were trying to ask, or, and this is something that I can understand because I fell in this boat when I was running an in-house creative team. We had tier 2 and tier 3 projects that were incredibly complex. They were very long. They required a lot of effort. They might not have been creatively complex, but they had other reasons that led them to be 200- and 300-hour projects. So that could be the case as well. This next question is a bit of a doozy. I'm going to call it out. We wanted to figure out how much time teams were focusing on digital work versus print. Like how digital are we becoming? And I think we actually asked the question probably in an overcomplicated manner. We could have made it easier. And instead of asking the question as you see here, we simply could have asked, is the majority of your team's effort being spent toward supporting digital projects, print projects, or is it pretty, 50-50, evenly distributed? But we didn't make it that easy. Instead, we asked what percentage of time was being spent on digital projects versus print projects. And we asked respondents to kind of round that number to the nearest 10%. So here's what we ended up with, and I want to explain it because, like I said, it's not very straightforward. It's a doozy. So each of the wedges in the pie are equal to the percentage of people who said that response. So if we look at the 10% label at 12 o'clock there, about 5% of our respondents said that 10% of their team's time is spent on digital projects. Likewise, moving clockwise, 15% of our respondents said that their team spends about 20% of their time with digital projects. It's a lot. It was difficult, but really what you need to take away here is the outer ring. That's the key takeaway, that starting with the upper right here, the dark blue, almost 40% of teams are spending more time on print projects. Almost the same amount are splitting their time almost 50-50, 40-60, 60-40 between digital and print projects. And then about a quarter of folks over there on the upper left are spending the majority of their time on digital projects. When I previewed this data at Beyond the Creative 2 weeks ago in San Francisco, one of the audience members, a very smart gentleman, said, well, what counts as digital, Jackie? And I was like, oh my God, palm to the face. Of course. I mean, that isn't a standardized definition. There are different definitions. So what we've created here is in response to that gentleman, that creative leader, kind of the start of, how do we define print versus digital, and then video on the side there. So print, the way we intended this question to be responded to was that print projects are things that will likely be printed. Either they're going to go to a press, and whether it's a digital press or an offset press, or maybe it's just your personal printer or like an office printer, but it's things you intend to be printed and read in a paper format. Digital are those projects that are produced with the intention of screen or digital viewing only. And then video, of course, is, I think, the one that's actually the most clear, right? It's being filmed. The one difference with video is sometimes people, if you're doing motion video that doesn't have live people in it, that can be one that people might put left or right in digital or video. The one I'll point out between print and digital that you'll see in both places, PowerPoint presentations, sometimes they're meant to be printed, right? It's just people they don't have InDesign and it's something they want printed, so they use PowerPoint. Other times, PowerPoint presentations are advanced and they're for screen viewing, and that's actually the intention of PowerPoint. But if you've ever read the book Slidegements, or Slideology, where they talk about Slidegements, that's kind of what you have over there underneath print on the left. This is not the end-all be-all definition. In fact, I want to do a pulse survey from Sela to help create some industry standards on what we're all categorizing as print versus digital. Feel free to drop me an email and tell me your thoughts, and I can hopefully incorporate them into the survey so that we can start creating a common vernacular for what means print versus digital in our industry. CNC Music Factory, things that make us go, I think you're going to see what we mean, because there's a couple things here that just gave us pause. So the first one is, and sometimes the pause is good, I should say, and sometimes it was not good. So a little over 40% of in-house creative teams have been asked to benchmark their costs against external agencies. What's not surprising is that it's more common for a chargeback group to be asked to do this than non-chargeback groups. If you are a non-chargeback group and you don't know what your chargeback rate would be, I think that's a really good exercise to go through, and there's a link at the bottom of this screen to a blog that can help you, one, figure out your chargeback rate, and then two, teach you how to calculate cost savings in case you are asked this. Because this is the second year we have asked this question, and more people this year versus last year are being asked to do this benchmarking. The next one is social media. So almost everyone's doing it. Only 14% of in-house creative teams are not supporting social media. And why this stands out or makes it go, is the most common thing in-house creative teams are doing is providing graphic content. I have to believe those 14% of in-house creative teams who are not providing graphic content could be. So their companies, organizations probably have a Twitter feed, probably have a LinkedIn presence, might have a Facebook presence, et cetera, and are using graphic content. But what they're probably doing is taking things we have done in the in-house agency and pulling low-res images, editing it on their own, and really not protecting the brand is how we'll phrase it, right? So there's an opportunity for those 14% to figure out how that's being done in their company and how you can help improve how your brand is being carried out in social media. The other thing I'll point out is the growing number of folks who are doing listening and responses. That was a very small number a year ago. Social media, those types of activities may sit in the in-house creative team, they may not. It's a full-time job, really monitoring social media, but it's interesting to see that some of that is coming into the in-house team.
And do you think that's part of the alignment with in-house being up 9 points in terms of reporting up to marketing communications? You see some overlap there?
Maybe. It can't hurt, right?
Yeah. 7 out of 10 in-house agencies now provide video services, and this is up from 5 out of 10 in 2015. Not surprising there, but impressively, almost 30% of those teams have at least 4 or more people dedicated to providing video capabilities. That's a pretty large group for almost 30%. And video continues to be an explosive opportunity for in-house agencies to provide additional value to their organizations. And Jackie and I were speaking earlier, we wouldn't be surprised if it, fast forward another 3 years by 2021, that this wasn't 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10. We're doing some degree of video support in their in-house agency. All right, of all the things that make us go, this next section makes me go something else. Maybe what the, we're a little bit blown away by this. So taking a look at the perception of available talent in the marketplace, these results simply just don't match the reality of the talent market right now. And we'll get into some data from third-party sources such as the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Staffing Industry Analysts, American Staffing Association. But we also wanted to kind of take a stab at this ourselves. When this data first landed on my desk, I really tried to take the position of, okay, forget everything that you know being in this industry and try and attack your knowledge from a counterpoint. And I tried my best. I went out and tried to validate, these perceptions, to look at it from every angle, and I just could not find it. So here's our best guesstimates, our best hypotheses, so to speak. In looking at these responses and trying to reconcile the idea, we took a look at that attrition is relatively low. It's actually extremely low, as 71% of teams had just 5% or less attrition in 2017. That's really incredible. The in-house industry overall has extremely low attrition. I'd say even lower than I would think. It's obvious that we have a lot of value to add people coming over from the agency side in terms of work-life balance, some of the things that could be missing. But have less than 5% attrition for over 71% of people, that's really low.
And presents its own pain points.
Good point. So relative to the talent perception conversation, maybe we thought that these people just don't have enough openings to feel the pain, that they're just not hiring. And if you only have 1 or 2 hires a year, maybe you can kind of live without a person for 30, 60, 90 days. You can spread that work around. So we thought, okay, that could be it. Well, we weren't quite right on that. So we took a look at teams with an attrition rate of above 10%. And crazy enough, these respondents felt the same way, or maybe even a little more confident about the availability of talent. So then we started scratching our heads really hard, and we said, okay, most creative teams are 20 people or less. So 10% isn't too painful when you consider whole numbers. So we looked at large and mega teams, and those with 30 or more team members. And we saw a slightly different picture, but nothing overly dramatic. And one final area that we thought could contribute that I think we're going to address next year, Jackie, is there isn't actually an opportunity to write NA in this question. So you kind of have to answer it. So with attrition being so low, there could have been a wide percentage of respondents who perhaps just aren't hiring a lot, and they don't know where it fits, and they're maybe stuck in, kind of the old media messages out there that we're still in this kind of tight labor market, which really that paradigm from a popular media perspective is just relatively transitioned, and I think is a little far behind. So they just put in there with their perception. And I'd say of all things that we hypothesized, that could be one of the most strong, or the strongest, I should say.
We'll know in 2019, right?
We'll know in 2019. So taking a look at some of the data to try and reason our experience and really validate that this is one of the hottest, if not the hottest talent market that we've ever seen, the staffing industry and BLS data tells us something completely to validate that. Well, let me take a step back. The overall message here is if you aren't having a tough time finding people, we congratulate you. That's an awesome, awesome thing, clearly. Perhaps you have a very strong corporate recruiting department or a great relationship with a third-party talent provider. Congratulations, keep that up. But equally important, we want to ensure that your expectations are appropriately set up. So if you do have turnover or you do have a large project that comes on your desk that you have to go out and find people, that you truly understand the climate that you're operating in. The March unemployment rate was 4.1% overall. So that's every category from machine operator to CMO or CFO and everything in between. Those with a bachelor's degree or higher had an unemployment rate, of 2.1%. That is beyond full employment for degreed professionals. Essentially, the only way to find available talent is to steal them from another employer. And as presented just a moment ago, we have really, really low turnover. Over 71% of you have 5% turnover. So, that has me scratching my head. So if we're stealing from each other, the turnover isn't reflected upon that. And the marketplace is saying that we're at full employment. Then if you look, and we didn't present this today, but as you comb through the report, you'll see that 97% of you are planning on maintaining or growing your headcount this year. That's all of you basically are planning on, you're not laying anybody off, and a lot of you are planning on hiring, and another 86% of you are planning on maintaining or adding contractors. So where is this coming from? The math it's just an impossible set of data and circumstances to validate these perceptions. The U.S. economy has averaged over 188,000 monthly job gains over the past 12 months. March wasn't the strongest at 103,000 jobs added. That was due to weather, our ever non-ending winter that we've had in the Northeast, a couple of really strong snowstorms. If you went back to February, the economy actually grew 313,000 jobs, so really strong. And the Fed has stated recently that the U.S. unemployment market is near or beyond full employment. If we look at temporary help, and this is a great, great avenue for the in-house groups to kind of augment their workforce, bring in new skills, allow for training and flexibility and vacations. So many great reasons to use temporary and contract help. Permalancers when you can or you don't have the headcount approved to hire full-time people. Year over year across all industries, it's 4.2% up. It's not measured, but I would imagine if it was measured specifically in marketing, creative and digital, that number would even be higher.
We go into so many consulting engagements where they say to us, listen, we're not allowed to add headcount. However, we can add contractors.
Right.
That's the regular line.
Different bucket. And I think you were telling me earlier, Jackie, at Beyond the Creative and some of the creative execs that you moderated, anecdotally, people were scratching their head out in the field a little bit about this.
Yeah, I was expecting when I was sharing this information with them, they'd be like, in line with what the survey results were. But the folks in our audience were like, you're right, they are nuts. I'm like, well,
who are they?
You are nuts. How are they? Right. But those folks in the room didn't feel the same as our results stated.
So it's something to watch. And I think, again, there's two main points here is, data is data. Again, if you're finding talent, we're happy for you. Keep it up. But just be really eyes wide open, so to speak, that if you anticipate needing talent over the next 6 months to a year, just be aware of the challenges and kind of get ahead of that, ensuring that your brand is well represented in the marketplace, that you're networking with people, that your interview process is quick and gets talent through kind of the system quickly. All those kind of best practices, don't ignore them. And then this is great news. I don't think any of us would argue this. After years of stagnant pay, wages are finally increasing. I'm sure we've all seen this or read about it, how this is kind of the wageless recovery that we've been going through since 2009, 2010. There's other terms for it, but early this year, wages were up 2.9%, and that's the most since 2009. And we know 2009 was when the Whopper happened. So not only employees are in demand, they're now able to demand higher wages. And this is something for us all to be aware of as we look at that low turnover. Your employees who may have had a fear-based approach to looking for a job, perhaps even some people on this call have put their ambitions to the side in a tough economic climate. But now they're very confident. Employee confidence is at one of the all-time high, and they're asking for more wages. And what it also validates is companies are ponying up. So they're now viewing as talent as a major risk to their being able to succeed, and they're starting to finally kind of thaw out when it comes to wage increases. And last but not least on this passionate topic for me, a major concern for economists right now is the labor market is too hot. And that could really derail economic growth. And you do a little bit of reading on this, you see that's one of the major fears that is out in the marketplace right now is companies won't be able to find the workers to keep up with the demand to market and sell and manufacture their products.
As our baby boomers retire, they're leaving a gap.
They're leaving a gap. So lots of forces here. All right, so please indulge us for what we promise is a few short moments to tell you about some programs and events. First, about the Boss Group. The Boss Group is a niche provider of human capital solutions. We've been doing creative marketing and digital staffing for over 30 years. We offer a suite of end-to-end solutions when it comes to creative digital and marketing staffing, whether it be temporary, temp to hire, or direct placement. So if you need someone for a day, all the way up to permalance or direct placement to become a part of your team, we hope that you'll keep the Boss Group in mind as a potential resource. We're also very proud that for the 8th consecutive year, we've won Innovero's Best of Staffing Award. We're the only national provider of creative marketing and digital staffing to claim that. So thank you to everyone who has rated us very favorably using the Net Promoter philosophy. One of our values is service excellence, so it's nice to see that validated out in the marketplace. A program that is co-sponsored between the Boss Group and Sela is our Creative Execs program. And Jackie's fresh off moderating one, so I'll let you speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's been a really exciting series. So Dallas, Washington, and Atlanta all sold out, which it's a free experience. So they've been at capacity in the rooms is a better way to say it. And we're looking forward to our Metro Park, New Jersey event, Chicago and Philadelphia. In fact, you can see Chicago and New York / New Jersey, are coming up. So we're about to reschedule the one on May 4th, so stay tuned for that. But each of those three on the right-hand side have availability, and you can sign up or register at creativeexecs.com.
Awesome. And last but not least, for the Boss Group, we have a program called Creative Connects, which is an awesome happy hour series. The next one's coming up on June 20th. You can go to creativeconnects.com. It's just a really, really cool event. They typically held at awesome venues across 7 cities, where creatives of all disciplines, you get copywriters, networking with UI people, marketing people showing up. It's just a really fun event, so we encourage you and hope to see you out there.
And then for Sela, we are the leading management consultancy and workforce solutions provider for in-house agencies. So what this means is we provide consulting, we help you solve your challenges, and we also provide teams, so managed services team who can be on site and help you execute all of your company's creative needs. We have 2 big events coming up in professional development. The first one is our Creative Manager Boot Camp, which is May 17th through 18th in New York, and I think sign-ups are a week or 2 left, so don't hesitate there. And then Project Manager Boot Camp is out in Minneapolis in June, and this is a really fantastic event where if your project managers are kind of winging it, this is a great opportunity for them to find an opportunity, or overuse the word opportunity there, but it's a great time for them to pick up some standards and templates and forms to formalize their approach to project management.
And 2 great places to be, spring in New York and summer in Minneapolis, early summer in Minneapolis.
Exactly. Clearly not holding a winter event in Minneapolis. So ahead of us, first of all, we did it.
We did it.
We did it, okay. Before we jump into Q&A, I just want to remind everyone that before end of business today, we'll be emailing you with instructions on how to download the 2018 report, a PDF of this presentation, and that report, you guys actually get it almost a whole week ahead of the general public. So thank you for attending today, and that's going to give you plenty of time to read the full thing so you can brag to everyone about all the information you have ahead of them. All right, we're going to take a look at the questions pane now. If you haven't submitted and would like to, please go ahead. All right. Oh, hi, Jason. I just saw him at San Francisco. He wants to start saying hi. Let's see. I apologize. You guys did not see the presentation for the first few minutes. That's on me. Oh, fixed it. Thank you. Okay. What do you consider a strategic division? So I'm going to open up my copy of the report so I can be complete in that response. When you get the report today, it's on page 10, but the ones we have put in there are marketing, communications, a hybrid of marketing, advertising, brand, marketing, communications. You know, that department's called Marcom, but sales and marketing sometimes are in the same place. In addition, public affairs is one of the ones we put in there. So I'm going to answer the reverse of that, or the inverse of that as well. Divisions that we consider to be non-strategic, and I think this will be very clear. So operations or shared services, IT, HR, print production, procurement, that's got to be awesome, legal, finance, and then maybe executives outside of those areas that we just listed.
Jackie, someone asked, how do you define mega teams? There's a question about that. Is there some insight that you could give on that?
So mega teams are teams with 50 or more team members, and I'll just go through all the team sizes real quick. So we call small 10 or less, mid 11 to 30, large 31 to 50, and then that 51 and over is mega.
Awesome. Video reporting social media in the house. That's an interesting question.
You know, I don't know that we specifically in that question asked about video content. We say graphic content, but I'm going to take that note as a way we can expand that question next year. I just promised at the beginning I wasn't expanding.
I think every year that promise is broken.
Then the next question is, was I surprised or were we surprised that more than 50% of respondents were on teams of 10 or less, but more than 70% of teams have a video team? No, like I want to say yes, but no, because I mean, the first part about 50% of teams being less than 50, 10 or less people, that's such a commonality, and it's just something kind of we accept as fact now in the creative industry. But to your point, if 50% of teams have 10 or less people, how are they giving up one or two heads to video is really what that comes down to. And I think video is just that prominent now. You kind of have to. Mm-hmm. Another way folks are taking care of their video is through, you know, a project manager or one producer on site, but then working with external vendors and staffing providers to get their video done. Mm-hmm. They might not have they might not have a studio in-house, they might not own the equipment, but they're a conduit to those services for their company, which is incredibly valuable.
So kind of to that point as well is if you're one of the groups that has not launched video yet, and perhaps you're one of the smaller groups, don't get overwhelmed by all the equipment, the rooms, the green screens, all the fancy kind of capital investments. I had a great conversation with an industry leader in this topic, and his advice was just get going. You know, buy the minimum amount of equipment that you need to do a couple shoots and get some momentum around it. And what you'll see is the demand will quickly come to you, which will fund future purchases. But just kind of do the MVP, you know, the most viable product kind of methodology, and don't be overwhelmed by all the costs, and just kind of get moving on it with as little equipment as possible, and you'll be amazed by the excitement within your company.
So we have a question from Reed. He asked, do you know what percentage of the in-house creative groups track time? I do, Reed. It's on page 51. 50% of teams track time through a system, and 6% do it manually. So 56 track time in general. Tracking time manually sounds awful. Like I said earlier, it's really inexpensive to get moving with a time tracking system that also does project management. Reed's follow-up question indicates that he and I have never been in the same room together, because he said, ultimately, do you recommend we track time? Yes, Reed, please track time. I think everyone should. It's a best practice, and it's a necessity to produce your department's KPIs. It tells you what type of people you should be hiring, what skill level, what type of, where your work is growing, where you're spending more time, so you know where, we did 10% more video than last year. We did 50% more video. I probably need to hire a video person. It helps you justify your hiring. Tracking time, it's a must-do for me. It is. I wouldn't start a team without tracking time. There's definitely bad ways to roll it out and good ways to roll it out. You don't want to be big brother with it. So Reed, let's get in a room.
Hello to Antonio from Rio, Brazil. That was just nice. Thank you for giving us a shout out from Rio. That's pretty cool. Jackie, there's a question here as well. We had a respondent not able to make the June in Minneapolis Project Manager Bootcamp, and will there be one, as far as you know, later this year after that?
No, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we just offer Project Management Bootcamp once a year. Oh, Crystal? Or is it Christy? Crystal? Yes, track time. She's reinforcing my message. When tracking time, who typically logs the hours? Project managers or the creatives themselves? Everybody tracks their own time. That's how you're going to make it accurate. I'm a strong proponent of real-time time tracking. However, I'm comfortable with folks putting it in at the end of the day, so long as they kind of keep a scratch pad throughout the day. I'm not comfortable with folks doing it on Friday and trying to remember what the heck they did on Monday. That's just junk in, junk out.
Oh, here's a really good one. This is from Steve. Steve writes, in the strong employment market, so thank you for validating that. Mm-hmm. You were clearly not one of the perceptions that thinks it's not. He is now starting to allow some teams to work remotely. We're seeing that more, Steve, both locally and in different parts of the country. So you're getting into perhaps hiring people that have no connection to your brand, very remotely. That's awesome. With the online communication and project management tools available, do you plan to capture any data on remote and flexible work schedules? I can tell you, and Jackie will answer this from a data perspective, I could tell you if you reach out, Steve, or if anyone wants to reach out, Andy Epstein, who's on our team, Jackie, our consultants, all of them have such awesome experience myself in terms of best practices in setting up remote workforces and some of the flexibility around that. From a data perspective, Jackie, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm looking for it because we do ask this and it's in here. I might have to get back to you without the page. But we ask folks, do they allow folks to work off site? What types of technology they're using? So I'm going to take that as a note for our follow-up. I'm not. Oh, I found it. Look at that. Page 13 when you look at it later. But we asked which of the following best describes your group's ability to practice flex time. So, can you flex your schedule? That's really important in this hot labor market that folks have a little, one job lets me work from home or lets me work 10 to 7 or 6 to 3 around my kids' schedule or around my life. That's going to be more attractive. So we do ask that. And then 69% of teams are allowing folks to work remotely, at least on an ad hoc basis. And then another 24% regularly allow folks to work remotely.
Awesome. And I'm sorry if this is obvious and many people are already engaged using this tool, but we've started using a software called Zoom here internally, which has really been a game changer when it comes to video conferencing. It's free up to the first 45 minutes, and if you want to have a subscription, I sound like a spokesperson to it. We have no financial investment. It's just been a game changing in terms of having people work remotely off-site, all different parts of the country.
This question that Dave posed, what advice would you give to a company interested in starting an in-house department and potentially one that would become a mega team very quickly? What should they think of first? Well, Dave, this is a loaded question. It's somewhat ironic. Someone else just asked me the same question last week. I was looking for this. So we've helped a couple people with this in our consulting engagements. And I think what folks forget to plan for, so I'm not going to exactly answer your question because there's so many things, but here's what I would say not to forget about. What type of culture are you trying to create? And that seems like maybe where you wouldn't be where you start, but I think it's really important, and we've learned. Start with culture. What are you trying to do? What is the mission? What is the vision? What is the value of the team? Why are you there? And then build from there.
Here's one that pulls at the heartstrings a little bit, if you'll indulge me to answering it. we had a viewer by the name of Gilbert who was wondering how an entry-level designer gets into the industry. And just real quick, Gilbert, one of the things I would suggest, and Jackie can certainly give some experience on this, is do some pro bono work, do some work for friends, get some portfolio built. The best way to get into the industry is not your resume, it's having great work and a great portfolio to showcase that can prove that you can do the job. I would absolutely start there.
If you're in a position where you can take on a little risk, and by risk I mean not a definite steady paycheck, and the younger you are, the more likely you are to be able to do that usually. Try temping. Don't be afraid of doing a temp job versus only looking for a permanent placement. You'll get some of those portfolio pieces. You'll get exposed to different companies and what they can offer you in different in-house teams.
Oh, that's a good one, Jackie. Do you have any good practices manual or something we can study to start being a chargeback department? I know we got a lot of info on that.
Yeah, our blog is a wealth of information on chargeback departments. Literally, if you just go to the search box on the blog at selaconsulting.com, you will put in chargeback and you'll see a ton. The big thing is start with that blog I spoke to earlier around figuring out what your rate would be, you know, and thinking about how competitive is that, how does that position us. I would also ask you why you want to become one, because there's definitely pros and cons on it. So if you want to have another discussion, feel free to hit me up.
Would you say the overall strongest pro, or one of the strongest pro, is justifying expenditures when it comes to people and capital investments?
Yes, and ideally you're in a position, and this is mostly often the case with chargeback groups, that you don't have to, to do freelance spending, that you don't have to go get permission to do freelance spending because you're creating a revenue to pay for them. Whereas if you're in a fixed budget, if you need more capacity, you've got to pull a lot of strings, and usually it's a long line you're waiting in to get more money, to get more people.
Right.
Whereas in a chargeback, volume goes up, your capacity can go up. On the flip side, and the negative, if things drop off, you're going to have to shed people. And that's a lesson I learned very hard in 2008. And the lesson I learned from that was you should have a balance of full-time employees and permalancers or temps on your team, so that if you do need to shed in a chargeback environment, you can do so in a way that doesn't affect your full-time headcount, because that is something that no manager or leader wants to do.
That's devastating.
Yeah.
This is a great one. Are teams reporting on whether clearly defined SOPs exist and are in use in their teams? If so, what percentage has them documented? We have an SOP fan out there. Thank you, Jeannie.
Oh, we do have that in here. That's in the process section. Are your workflow processes documented? Page 45. 45% of teams say yes, everything is documented. And 40% say some of our major ones are documented, which is a pretty good place to be, honestly. And then just a small 15% say few, if any, SOPs are documented. Okay. Let's see. What benchmarks should leaders ask of their teams for track time overnight? All right. I'm sorry, not reading the question well out loud. I'm trying to digest it at the same time. So really, the question is, what are good utilization targets or billing targets for team members, right? So regardless if you're a chargeback group or not, if you're tracking time, what percentage of your time is spent on projects versus on administrative or non-project-based work? For individual contributors, the most common response or average we see is 80%. We've seen as low as 75%, but most often individual contributors are between 80 and 85%, with 80 being the common one. Project managers, sometimes we see down at 70%, because sometimes it can be a little bit harder to bucket their time, but 80 to 85 is a good one to go with. And then your managers, it really depends on, there were 2 or 3 key factors. So how large is their team? So how many direct reports are constantly bugging them, to be blunt? How diverse is their team? Is everyone who reports to them doing the same exact thing? That's easier to manage than managing people who do, 8 people or 4 or 5 people who do 3 or 4 different things, 2 copy editors, 2 designers, and a web designer. That creates different types of fires, which is harder. And then the third factor that would influence how much time a manager could bill is what are his or her strategic responsibilities to the department. How much are they involved in running the department versus just managing that team. 40% is kind of an average. I've seen as high as 60. I've seen as low as 20, sometimes 0, but usually between 20 and 60, with 40 being a regular.
So we're just about up on time. I think we'll end it, if that's okay, Jackie, with a fun question. Are we planning on doing any creative execs or beyond the creative boot camps or project manager boot camps in Miami? And the answer would be, if we have another winter like this, hell yeah.
Yeah, and then I could bring like Will Smith into my life.
So stay tuned, because I think that's a really viable option for many reasons. So
we will be doing Beyond the Creative this fall. We just finished the one in San Francisco. We think we'll be in Chicago in October, but we're not contracted yet, so stay tuned.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Have a great rest of your day.